Hello there, YouTube. Welcome to the inside of my head. We're talking about head. So, today's topic is about the kilo. So I have brought my hammer again because that is exactly 1 kilo, or at least the hammer head, the metal part, probably without the things in the middle and everything, but the clean metal, the amount of steel should be exactly 1 kilo, and then we have something else attached to the hammer head too. But when I'm saying exactly 1 kilo, what I'm talking about? I'm talking about the full hammer weighing around 1 kilo and 200 grams, I believe it was, or 1 kilo 250 grams or something. So when you take the hammerhead alone, it's closer to 1 kilo than the full thing, but what is exactly 1 kilo? It is when my food weight says 1 kilo, 0.0000, 1000.0 grams or whatever, however precise it is. Or is it wrong because it's just a weight and it costs like 15 bucks or something? So is it even that good? Is it precise enough? Or should I believe the text on the hammer more than I believe my weight, the precisement of my weight, whatever. Probably none of them, because there's actually a precise definition to the kilo, and they have been in a long time. It's very precise, like exceptionally precise. It's like one thing and nothing else is 1 kilo. So we're actually talking about nothing is really precisely 1 kilo. And I'm pretty sure this hammer is not 1 kilo. Because if this hammer was ever 1 kilo, like exactly, then the first time I used the hammer, it was not 1 kilo anymore. Because two things can happen when I use the hammer. Either it got dirty because it smashed the thing I hammered at, and the thing I hammered at left some leftovers on the hammer, and therefore it got heavier because it was dirty. There was something else on the hammerhead, so it was heavier than it was before. Or else I scratched the hammerhead, and therefore there was less steel left on the hammer. So it lost some steel in the process of hammering, and therefore it got lighter. And to be honest, now I have just cleaned my hammer totally, and like scraped off the worst rust and stuff, so there's not any dirt on it, so it doesn't weigh more than when I brought it. But I'm pretty sure I have scratched off a lot of metal, and then I scratched off the rust. There was something coming, there was probably coming something extra with it, so I'm pretty sure it weighed less than when I brought it now. But however, it still weighs like around 1 kilo. You will still say it weighs 1 kilo. I will not say that it weighed almost 1 kilo now, because I don't know it precise enough to say that anyway. So it's just like around 1 kilo. But it has never been precise, and it is not precise now. If it has ever been precise, then it's definitely not now. Unless it is precisely now, because it wasn't before. At least some point in this hammer's history, it has not been precise. And if it has ever been precise, it has only been in one instance of the history of that hammer. Because that's what precise really means. But what is 1 kilo then? Well, the kilo has quite a long and interesting history, I think, at least. And it's kind of, I really want to start in a specific place. But the history, well, the kilo I want to talk about, which I think is the most interesting kilo, it has both like a prehistory and a post-history. But for the most part of the history of the metric system, I can say it like that without lying. For the most part, so the most significant value we have put to the kilo is the definition of the kilo which are placed in France. And that sounds strange. How can definition be placed somewhere? Well, that's because the definition is a specific object. Because in France, there are placed a single object made out of metal, which weighs exactly 1 kilo. And I can say that with amazing confidence because that's the object that defines the kilo. So you cannot say that it's not weighing exactly 1 kilo because it is the kilo. So it cannot not weigh exactly 1 kilo because if it doesn't weigh a kilo, then that becomes a kilo. Like if you lose some weight, then it becomes a new kilo. Because it's the definition of the kilo, so it's always weighing exactly 1 kilo. And that's very fascinating to think about, I think. But also scary to think about that the kilo could actually change. And the definition of a kilo is determined by what exactly the maker of the product has used to measure if it is 1 kilo. Like you could use a lot of things that I'm talking about. I could use the weight I use to weigh my foods. And that is probably not the most precise weight in the world because it costs nothing to buy. So that's probably the worst thing you could do. You could also use a scientific weight that costs like 100 times the amount of my weight. And that will be very precise. But how did they calibrate that? Did they calibrate it using the kilo in France? Or did they calibrate it using something else that supposedly weighed precisely a kilo? That's the question, because there can be a long way from this to that. Because again, there is one single object standing somewhere in Paris in France, which are called the kilo and weigh exactly 1 kilo. And it has been called a bunch of different things. You can call the international prototype of the kilogram, or the like LE, the French, the grand K for the grand kilo, the big kilo, because it's the biggest, most important, it is the kilo. If you get it, it has been called the euro kilo for like euro time, like the old kilo. It has been called the kilogram des actifs, and that's the total French name for it. So if you Google that, you will definitely get to this. But again, it can be quite hard to spell right if you're not good at French and have not seen the words before. So probably just write the international prototype of the kilogram, because if you write the international prototype of the kilogram in Google search, you will also get it quite fast. So do that now, look at it now, and then let's talk a bit more about it. It is made of 90% platinum. That's very expensive. If you're not sure, it's the exact metal that is more expensive than gold. Like we have the 5 most expensive metal in the world. I'm not even sure silver is still number 5, but it's very famous. But we have gold, that's the 4th most expensive metal in the world. So that means we have 3 metals more expensive than gold, and not many people know this for some reason. But we have platinum is the first one, then we have palladium, and then we have rhodium. That's the most expensive, and it has changed. They have switched spaces in some points in time, and in one specific point, gold was actually considered the most expensive, but that was a short period of time. Most of the time, at least one of the other 3 has been more expensive, but most of the time, rhodium has been more expensive. At the worst time to buy rhodium, if you can say it like that, it was actually more than 30 times as expensive than gold for 1 kilo, or one of the same amount, of course, you could say, whatever. So again, palladium, a very expensive metal. And has been cost. How much does it cost again? I'm not sure if the prices I remember is in dollars or crowns, and that's unfortunate. But it had at least cost a couple of 100,000 per kilo, and maybe a million. That's again, I'm not sure. But it has cost a lot. A kilo of platinum costs a lot. Let's just hold it there. And that is again 90% platinum. So you already know there that it is at least a couple $100,000 for that part of the metal alone. But it is mixed with 10% iridium, which are not one of the 5 most expensive metals, as I have just said, but it's very close. We are definitely in top 10 when we are calling iridium, or at least top 15. So it's a very expensive metal too. But again, it is nowhere close to platinum. It is mostly the 90% platinums that make up the price for this thing. But it's very clean because there's nothing else. There's only these 2 metals. It's just a mix of these 2 metals. And the reason they have done that is because both platinum and iridium are metals that don't really do that much. No, copper becomes green, silver becomes mostly black, iron rust and disintegrate totally. So iron will be a very bad idea for something that should hold forever and should not disintegrate even the slightest. Like, one thing is that iron disintegrate totally, so you can see it. Another thing is when metal disintegrates so little that you don't even see it, but you can weigh the difference if you have a very good weight. And that's what they're going for here. They're going for the least disintegrating possible. And platinum is probably the single material on the whole earth that will change the least in time. It is a really amazing metal. It's not just expensive, but again, it doesn't rust or anything. It doesn't change in any way, but it's also very hard. So if you have a bracelet made of platinum, it's almost as hard as if it was made of the strongest steel on earth. I'm talking about the strongest steel because you can get some steel that's less strong than platinum, but most steels today are of the stronger kind. So most steels of today are a bit stronger than platinum, but only a bit. So almost as strong as steel. It's like the same feeling to you as having a steel bracelet. So it's very strong, but also looks so pretty, so shiny. It's amazing how many qualities platinum have. They can both be beautiful and shiny and also strong, but also hold forever. So that's of course the first metal you should choose to make such a thing like this. And the iridium, I'm not sure why they chose to mix it with that, because, well, it has some of the same qualities. It's also very a metal that don't change much, but I'm not sure why they thought it was a good idea to combine these two. Maybe it makes the quality superior if you combine it. I'm not sure about that. It's quite normal to combine things, like to put the rhodium in silver if you should make the silver how can you say, if you should make the silver stop turning black, then you put rhodium in, because rhodium also doesn't change at all. And the reason why I use rhodium, not platinum, it's strange, because rhodium are way more expensive. Why should you do the most expensive metal in the world to do that quality to silver? But probably because rhodium are a little bit better to that. So you could have made it of 100% rhodium, and I think it would be just fine. Rhodium is not as strong as platinum. However, it doesn't need to be strong if it just have to stand still and don't disintegrate. So again, I'm not totally sure why they use platinum and iridium. I think there will be some other metals or combination that could be better, but there's probably some very scientific and clever reason why I have mixed exactly these two together. But no matter what, they have surely made an exceptional product that will last forever. And that is probably mainly also what it has done, because it was made back in what was it again? It was in the 1799, so almost in the 1800. So we are talking more than 220 years ago they made this kilo, and it still holds up today and is placed the same place in France. But if it is placed in France, how can you make this in Germany, for example? And even worse, how can you make products in USA? Well, they done that they took the prototype of the kilo, and immediately after making it, immediately after determining the weight, they made 6 sister prototypes, sister copies, whatever you want to call it, and put them inside the same room as the main prototype. So we have actually 7 pieces of the 1 kilo standing in the same room in France. But that doesn't make the story better. That just made you sure that if there happens something to one of them, if an idiot should throw it on the ground and break it or something, then there were 6 more you could use instead. However, what they did too was they made 10 more copies of it. Actually 12 to be precise, because they made 2 extra copies too for special use. But they make 10 copies of them for use. And later they made a copy of the copy to every single country, mostly. For example, to every single country in Europe and to USA, and to many countries in South America, also to Mexico and Canada, to many countries in Asia. So everyone got a kilo in their country. But that kilo they got in the country is actually a copy of the original kilo. So not really that precise actually. And they have estimated actually when they made them, they could not even make them precise, because they was made 200 years ago. So we were not like amazing engineers back then. So when they made the copies of the kilo, they actually made them and made them after they made them, and they estimated their what can call divergence of the exact weight of the prototype 1 to be plus minus up to 100 micrograms. Some were only like tenths of micrograms, but some were up to 100 micrograms. 100 micrograms is a tenth of a gram. Oh wait, no, it was micrograms. No, that's actually a tenth of a milligram. I've just confused myself. No matter what, it's not like so much. It's like very little. So it doesn't really like matter so much at all. Like this hammer, I'm pretty sure that I tried to weight it to be 1 kilo, but I'm pretty sure they used at most a weight that can be like 10th of grams. So 10,000 parts of a kilo. I'm pretty sure that's the most precise they have done this. And if you even have a weight that could be more precise than that, I'm pretty sure they didn't care if it was more precise. I'm pretty sure they had a rather loose, again, very precise in some circumstances, but not as close to the precision of these copies anyway. But a rather loose, but still precise standard to how much this hammer should weigh. So I'm pretty sure this is not at all as precise as the copies of the kilo. So it doesn't really matter if these are made after one or not of the copies. But even if you make a lot of hammers made out of one of the copies, they will probably be so different by itself that some of the hammers will be closer to another copy. That's how close the copies was in precision anyway. But they knew from the start that it was not exactly the same. But the problem also is that the main prototype and the sixth sister prototype has been in a vacuum, inside a vacuum, in Paris, all the time. And why put it inside a vacuum? Well, what is a vacuum? Vacuum is nothing. Like, vacuum is not only air, vacuum is no air. So nothing at all. If there is nothing, well, nothing can hurt it. I guess that's the logic about it. So they are kept very well. But the copies of the copies, they were distributed out to the different countries. Well, they were also preserved very well. Not just as well, but as well as the countries want. So they were most of the time also kept in vacuums of some kinds. At least somewhere in the world. But then, USA is a very big country. Actually, at some point, USA got 5 copies of the copies. You can call it original copies or original copies of copies, or whatever you want to call them. At one point, USA had 5 at least. And that's because USA are a very big country. But still, USA is so big. USA are like 1,000 times 1,000 kilometers. And that's not true, but I'm just saying something here. So even if USA had one in the middle of the country and then one in every corner, and that will not be clever to have one in every corner, because to maximize or minimize the distance, you should actually put them closer to the middle. So if USA are like this, then you could have one in the middle and then a square around it with the other 4. And then you will still have, if that is 1,000 kilometers, then you have 2 here, 1 here, and 1 here. So that's a quarter distance here and a quarter distance there. And that's the same in all directions. So you will still have like 300 kilometers to the nearest. That's the nearest. And some places probably 400. Maybe double 600, up to 600 kilometers to the nearest of the kilos. So of course every company that should make this cannot travel multiple hundreds of kilometers to weigh it against the original. And also every company cannot do that at the same time, because if there is only 1 or 5 or what you would call it, then they will not have time. There will not be enough for anybody. So the thing they did was they made copies of that, and then the copies they made of that, they make copies of these copies too. So we are talking copies of copies of copies of copies. We are talking, if the original prototype is number 1, then we are out in the 5th layer of copies from that, when we are down to what is calibrating the weights that they use to make some products like this. So one thing is that the American copies of the kilo is not weighing exactly the same as the French original prototype number 1. That fact doesn't really matter when you can get down to the real product they are making with the weight of 1 kilo, because that is, there's a lot of other arrows happening inside America. I know that's not a new thing, but that's not what I'm talking about. Oh, I'm just making fun. But it's true. But anyway, it's just for fun. But it's the least important copies that makes the biggest difference. Because when you have to make copies to different companies, you don't care that much. Because if something goes wrong, it's only happening to that one company. So that one company have 1 kilo hammers that is smaller than the other company's 1 kilo hammers. I think nobody really cares about that. So they were not going into that much detail. They was accepting a lot of errors in that circumstance. But of course, when you are making copies of something, then if that something you are making copies of is off what you should really have been making copies of, then of course it can only go worse. But again, the precision we have used for the kilo have always been quite loose when we are making products like these. So it has not really mattered that much. But then we have found out that, and to be clear, when I'm talking about copies of copies, so what I will call the third generation, if the original prototype number 1 is 1 generation, and the copies of that are 2nd gen copies, and the copies of the copies are then 3rd generation copies, then when I'm talking about these copies, just to be clear, they are made of the exactly same thing as the original prototype number 1. As I told you, the original prototype number 1 was made of 90% platinum and 10% iridium. Then the copies of that, including the sister copies, the original sisters sitting in the same room, and the 10 to 12 extra copies, and such, they are made of also 90% platinum and 10% iridium. And the copies of the copies that was distributed to all over the world, they were also made of 90% platinum and 10% iridium. So they were very precise with the copies and the copies of the copies. So to the 3rd generation of copies, we are still very precise. But then of course, USA, and they're not the only one, I'm just trying to be precise here to make it easy to understand and follow me. USA, which had 5 platinum iridium copies, they used their copies to make copies of them, and they mostly made them in steel or titanium, maybe. I think not in so many use titanium. Mostly it was made of steel, the copies, so not as high tech and not as expensive. And then the copies of them were probably also made of steel. So that was mainly where the problems happened and where it started to begin to lose weight. But what they found out after 100 of years, actually, like we have in the 1799, they made the first prototype, and somewhere later, like I think it was in the early 80s or something, they got to distribute out to most of the world or something. But they have test weighted it a couple of times, and they found out around 100 years later, when they test weighted it, they found out that the American copies have actually lost weight in comparison to the French original. So even the platinum iridium copies didn't last forever. And I just told you half an hour ago, or how long I have been speaking now, that there was actually lasting forever, but apparently they were not. They were actually losing weight. But again, we are talking micrograms here. We are not even talking milligrams. So it's not such a big problem. It's just like it's a fact. However, the steel copies lost weight faster than that. So first they were less precise and they lost weight faster than that. But again, the real problem is with the... Oh, I have actually been talking for precisely half an hour. That's amazing. I was just getting high because I never know how much to talk. But the real problem here is the fact that even the originals are losing weight, because but you cannot really say that the French original lose weight, because that is the definition of the kilo. So that is what they compare the rest of the copies to. But you can also not know that it's not losing weight, because if the other platinum iridium blocks lose weight, why should the original not do the same? There's not something magic about it, it's just a material of the earth. So it's probably like this: everything lost weight, but not in the same rate. And the things in vacuum didn't do it that fast, so therefore the French was the heaviest one in the end. But what can you do about that? Well, you can accept the fact that the French original maybe lose a little bit of weight, but not as much as the other, because it's in vacuum, so we're talking very little. And then you can just recalibrate the whole world after that. And that sounds like a big procedure to start, because you should go down to the single company that makes something like this. But no, because again, the single companies, they have a very shady 5th generation copy of steel that's not even precise anyway. So they don't have to change all these copies to new unprecise copies. They can use their own copies for how long they want. It's just like the definition that have changed. So the amount of micrograms this hammer will be away from the exact definition of 1 kilo has changed. That's more how we should look at it. So if we should just accept the fact that the French kilo are still the real kilo, and that is exactly 1 kilo, and no matter if it changes or not, the 1 kilo definition will just change with it. And then we could make some new platinum iridium copies to send out to the world, so they can recalibrate and they can get something that weighs exactly 1 kilo per the definition of 1 kilo from today. And that will of course be very expensive, because platinum is very expensive, and it's expensive to manufacture something that precise. It's not even the platinum that's really the problem. The problem is the manufacture process needed to do something so precise. But that's what we have lived with up until now, because we're actually not using it anymore. But to respect the French prototype a bit, I will start talking about what happened before the kilo. Because we actually had something called the Grave in 1793, which was defined as the mass of exactly 1 liter of water. And that is very strange, because that is also the definition you use today. How much does 1 liter of water weigh? Well, exactly, precisely 1 kilo, because that's how it's defined. It's defined to mix perfectly together. But that was in 1793 that definition started. 6 years prior to the prototype. 2 years later, in 1795, they made up the word grain, which is 1,000th of a grave, or by other means, a cubic centimeter of water. Like a liter is a cubic decimeter. Like a liter is 10 by 10 by 10 cubic centimeters of water. And then they made the grain, which was 1 by 1 by 1 centimeter of water. So 1 cubic centimeter of water. And then in 1799, they renamed the grave to the kilogram. And that is funny because the kilogram, or the kilo for short, how most people pronounce it, which are funny because kilo just means 1,000. So when we are just saying a kilo, we could actually mean a kilometer or a kiloliter. It's actually something that exists, but nobody uses it because we never have so much petrol in our car. Am I right? So what do we use it for? Fuck that, I guess. Or it could be kilobytes or kilopascal. But now I'm talking too scientific anyway. It gets too nerdy for me, so use it. Fuck that. But kilo again means 1,000, so it could be a lot of things. Kilo could be short for a lot of things. But kilo in everyday speaking are only like seen as short for kilogram. But it's strange because the kilo is the main SI value of the weight of something. Like the meter is the main SI unit for length. Then we have centimeter, means 100 of a meter, and kilometer means 1,000 meter. So, and we have that too with liter. Again, centiliters 100 of a liter and kiloliters 1,000 of a liter. So we have it with all of the SI units except for kilo, because what is 1,000 kilo? Well, that's not a kilo, that's ton. Again, makes no sense because that doesn't even mean a million. So that makes no sense. Also, what is 1,000 tons? That's a megaton. That makes no sense because mega means a million, so that should be a million tons, but that's only 1,000 tons. But mega makes sense because it means a million, so it's a million kilo, but then it should be a million kilo, or mega kilo, not a million kilo. It should be mega kilo, but that doesn't make sense because we have just had ton, so why should it be kiloton and kilo again? So maybe therefore they call it a megaton. But megaton just sounds like a million tons, and now has been spoken in a ring, so that's also strange. And then we have gram, and gram isn't called millikilo, which is 1,000 of a kilo. That's just called gram. That has one word, gram. And then we have milligram, means 1,000 of a gram, but that should be microkilos because it's a million of a kilo. If you get what I mean by micrometer. Micrometer is a million of a meter, so microkilo should be a million of a kilo. But instead we have micrograms, which are actually billions of a kilo. And then we have milligrams, which is a million of a kilo. So all the names, well, the names in the top are fucked up, but the name in the bottom are made out of gram instead of kilogram. And the made in the top are like a mixed bag of shit. So it's very strange because, again, the kilo is the main unit of the SI units for weight. And again, you can see that in the history because it started with grave. So grave was the first unit for weight in the SI system, and that is the same as a kilo again, and it has a fine name, grave. I'm not saying it's a good name, but fine name was just one single name for that. But then for some reason they made 1,000 of a grave, and instead of calling it a milligrave like we used to do and will make sense to do, they just call it a gram. And grave and gram are pretty close, so it would be pretty stupid to have grave and gram both meaning weight and meaning nearly the same thing, but still 1,000 of a difference. It would be quite stupid to have it like that. And then again, 4 years later, in 1799, they changed it to a kilogram, meaning 1,000 of a gram. So they choose to keep the gram, but Scott the grave. Scott. What does that even mean? Scott. They choose to delete the grave from history. And that was probably because they think that was the least good of the two words they have invented in the last 10 years. So then the main unit was called the kilogram. So it was not because gram was invented before kilo, rather the opposite direction. Kilo was invented before gram, but not the name of it. So because we made up the name gram and invented the gram as 1,000 of a kilo, then we decided to change the name of the kilo because we didn't like the name apparently. But when we changed the name of the grave to kilogram, then we also made this original prototype of the kilogram in France to really sell it for good what a kilo was. And it sounds quite stupid because we have just 6 years prior to that defined the kilo as a liter of water. And a liter is a very precise definition of 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water. So that's not really anything you can fuck with. A liter has always been defined out of the sheer size of water. 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water. A cube. A dense cube of water. That has always been a liter and that has never changed. So we cannot discuss that. And if a kilo has been defined as exactly 1 liter, then it has been defined as exactly an amount of water. But what was the problem then? Well, maybe because water do not weigh the same thing. Like when water is ice, it actually weighs less, or it actually doesn't weigh less, because when water becomes ice, it expands, so it weighs the same thing. But it gets less dense, which means it weighs less compared to the size. And that's something you can test yourself by putting some ice cubes in a glass of water. I sadly don't have any ice cubes right now, but I have a glass of water. But two things can happen when you put something down to a glass of water. Either it sinks straight to the bottom, or else it will float in the top. And in the float in the top parts, multiple things can happen. It can float totally on top of water, or it can be sinking a bit down in water, all the way up to it's nearly immersed, but it cannot be fully submerged, not immersed. It cannot be fully submerged because then it sinks to the bottom. But it can be all around the sheer height of the thing you put down the water. So there can be some variation in how dense it is. But again, either it flows or not. And if it's more dense than water, it will not float at all. If it's less dense than water, it will always float in either of these amounts. And that's what ice cube does. They float in water. To be precisely, or not too precisely, but roughly a tenth of the ice cube are on top of water and 90% is underwater. So that means it's a little bit less dense than water, but not a lot less dense than water. But if you should be more precise, not exactly a tenth, but close, rather close. However, that means that if you have a 10 by 10 by 10 centimeter ice cube, it will not weigh the kilo. It will weigh less. I'm not sure how much. I should actually Google that. But also depends on how cold the ice cube are, because if it got even colder, it will weigh something else. Again, it will not weigh something else, but it has another size, so it will weigh something else compared to the size. So if you cut it to 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters, when it's even colder, you will get a different weight if you do it exactly when it freezes. However, so we cannot say that a kilo is a 10 by 10 by 10 ice cube. But then you are like, yeah, but we are not talking about ice cube, we're talking about liters of water, so liquid water. So if it's 10 by 10 by 10 liquid water, isn't it precise enough? No, because it's the same thing when water is liquid. It changes volume when the temperature changes. So in theory, if you had a glass of water filled totally up to the top in one temperature, you could leave it. I don't remember how it changes exactly, but for example, you could leave it out in the sun and then it will fill over. Or maybe the other way around, if you fill a glass of water with warm water, but then leave it out in a cold room, so the water will cool down, then it will actually flow over because it will take up more space than it did when you fill the glass up. So that's actually amazing to think about, and you should actually try to test that yourself. And that's the thing they actually solve when they change the name to the kilogram, because when they use the grave, they just say a liter of water. But when they made the name grave, they don't say how hot the water should be. But when they change the name to kilogram, they actually change the definition to be exactly 1 cubic decimeter of water at the temperature where it's the most dense. And that means it weighs the most compared to the size. So that actually means it takes up this space. So when the same mass of water take up the least amount of space, that's the kilo. And that is around 4 degrees Celsius. So that actually means very cold water. So when you take very cold water, fill it up to the top of the glass, then it's very dense. It's the most dense it can be. So if you put that out in the sun, it will become less dense. And less dense means less weight compared to the size. So if it will weigh this compared to the size, what will then happen? Well, it will weigh the same because it will have the same mass of water. So that will mean it will expand in the heat. So if you fill up a glass with cold water and place it out in the sun, then if you fill it totally up to the top, so it starts actually going over the top but not falling down the sides, and you place it out in the sun, then it will actually start to run over. So that's a very interesting experiment you could do. And 4 degrees Celsius is not a lot. If you're not used to the metric system, actually just be used to it. But the metric system is very easy. Water freezes when it's under 0 degrees, not at exactly 0 degrees, but under. So my computer just went into green screen mode. Funny, that's fortunate. But the metric system is like that. Water freezes at less than 0 degrees and becomes liquid at exactly 0 degrees. Then at exactly 100 degrees, it starts to boil and evaporate. So that's how this Celsius is made. That's precisely how Celsius is defined. Now it's not a video about Celsius, but that's quite easy to define because that's how it's made up and defined. And it has never changed, so it's that easy. Nothing to talk about. So that means 4 degrees Celsius is just about when it starts to freeze. And you can heat up the water up to 100 degrees without it evaporating. So it can become very, well, what should I say, not dense. It can take up a lot of more space than it does when you fill up the glass with cold water at around 4 degrees Celsius. So that's an interesting experiment you should do at home. And I'm thinking way too much of it, but that's That's what this is about. Truly. So that was how they defined the kilo again. In 1799, yes, we have not gone any further. I have talked about that for 20 minutes or something. But that's the redefinition of the kilo, or the name of the kilo happened there. And the difference between the kilo and the grave was that the new kilo was defined at exactly 4 degrees Celsius, where the grave was just roughly defined as a liter of water. So it only changed in the way that it became more precise, but it also changed in the way that they actually made the prototype standing in France, which was exactly 1 kilo. Or in some way or another, it was actually not exactly 1 kilo, because the definition was very precise again. The definition was exactly 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water at exactly 4 degrees Celsius. So it was 2 exactlies. So it was precise all the way through, where the prototype in France was actually just made to be so close as possible, engineering possibility with production of such a thing at the time of the history. That it was the most precise they could make it after that definition. But that also means it will never be able to be exactly precise against the definition I have just talked about. So it's actually kind of strange they have to make this kilo, but they apparently just want to have like an exact object that weighs a kilo, instead of they have to weigh water or something. And was probably the problem with water as a liquid, because you cannot really weigh a liquid with a flow over the weight, so you have to have a bowl inside. But then you have to recalibrate the weight to not include the bowl, so that will make some minor problems. And it could be therefore they made a physical object, because they don't have to recalibrate your weight twice, or what you can say. But there will also be some minor variation in that physical product. So I think kind of you end up with the same kind of mistake anyway. However, that's what they did, and that is how they have defined the kilo all the way up until I believe it was 2017 or 18 or something, where they sadly but truly starting to define the kilo by some calculation, including the Planck's constant. And why did they include the Planck's constant? But that's quite easy, because it's a constant. You could also just say something else, like the kilo is exactly 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water. That's some constant factors included in the SI system. But the problem with that is that water is not a constant. Water is a state of molecules made out of the atoms oxygen and hydrogen. And well, oxygen and hydrogen doesn't really change, but the exact state of water can change. So maybe water at 4 degrees Celsius take up so much space today, but in hundreds of years maybe take up this or more space, because water has just simply changed. So by losing something as the Planck's constant, that's like we have some constants in the universe that are very constant, and therefore we put the word constant after. That makes sense. But if you see a word with the word constant after, that doesn't mean that it's a constant number. It means that it's some of the most constant things in the whole universe. We have the speed of light. That's very constant. It is actually so constant that only because the single fact that the speed of light is constant, we don't believe you can go faster than the speed of light, because it seems so strange that this is the exact constant it is. So it seems like the only reason why the speed of light is the constant is because it could not be any faster, and light tries to be as fast as possible in the known universe it exists in right now. Oh my god, that was a mouthful. So, speed of light is a constant. And everybody knows, or mostly I hope at least, knows the speed of light and the fact that it's a constant. But actually, you can kind of discuss if they're constant or not, because the speed of light is a constant in vacuum. But actually, the speed of light in air, like most of the light we see with our eyes today in our living life here on Earth, over the water level, is actually a bit slower, and the speed of light in water is actually even slower. So speed of light is actually not constant. It changes in different environments, but the speed of light in vacuum is constant. And another constant in the universe is the Planck's constant. I'm not gonna explain what it is because it's very complicated. And I could say how the kilo is related to the Planck's constant, like exactly like a precise definition of the kilo, but my computer crashed, and well, it is finished restarting, so it's not totally dead. Of course, it's like doing fine right now. However, my internet is not open, and my fact site I used as a little cheat sheet today is not open. And this is the exact point in time where I need to use it the most, because of course I cannot remember either the Planck's constant in my head or the relation between the kilo and the Planck's constant. But imagine it's like it's what do we even call it? It's just some calculation where the Planck's constant is evolved, and so some random numbers and calculation rules, what signs are evolved. I cannot remember any of the exact math terms in English at all right now. But I can come with an example. We have the Planck constant. I'm not gonna say any number or something, just Planck constant. We have the simple word Planck constant. So we can maybe have times 5 equal the kilo, if you get what I mean. And the times 5 is just a random number they insert because the Planck's constant are not the same as the kilo. Because if it was, then we will change the definition of the kilo, and that is actually not what they did when they changed the definition of the kilo from being the exact object standing in Paris in France to becoming something related to Planck's constant. Because they don't want to change the definition of a kilo, because if they did, this will no longer be a kilo. And there, it is not precisely a kilo, but I don't care, it's close enough. But imagine if it should be exactly the Planck's constant and it's like a fifth the weight suddenly, then this will become 5 kilos suddenly. And it's not 5 kilo, it's 1 kilo. Or it's not exactly 1 kilo, but it's way closer to that than 5 kilos. So it'd be so strange if I should start to call this 5 kilo, and suddenly my smartphone will become 1 kilo in weight. It would be so strange to say my smartphone weighs 1 kilo, because it doesn't feel like 1 kilo, because this feels like 1 kilo. You know what I'm saying? You cannot get used to that because we are hardwired to think that this is 1 kilo. So you cannot change that in the human brain now. Therefore, they don't want to change the definition per se, but they want to change how we define the kilo, so we can define it more precise, and therefore don't need to make one single copy of the exact prototype copy to know that we have a precise copy, but we can just use the calculation, and from the calculation we can make a prototype number 1. So everywhere in the world, if we have a very good laboratorium, then we can, with some simple math and some great engineering, we can make exactly 1 kilo everywhere in the world now. And that is actually great and a very cheaper solution than what we have had up until now. So that's why they use a Planck constant. And what they did was, of course, they made a reverse calculation. So use a kilo. How much is a kilo? Then they have, okay, we wanted the kilo to be the Planck constant. How can we do that? Well, we say minus this number and then we get, or something, you know? So that's how they make a calculation. And then after they made the calculation, they use it in reverse to make the kilo from the Planck constant. So now we can make up the kilo directly from the Planck constant with some simple math and a rule you just to remember. And I cannot remember now, but you can Google it. So that's how easy it is. It's so easy that I can make the kilo in my home now if I had the right tools. But I'm not all the right tools. It also, what's the definition of making a kilo? Because you can never make the kilo exactly 1 kilo, but you can make it closer and closer. So it is precise in like plus minus 1 kilo. That's how I know this is 1 kilo, not 2 kilos, and not a half kilo. It's closer to 1 kilo than the other possibilities. Or can I make it precise to the nearest gram or the tenth of a gram? That's probably the most I can go because I don't have a weight that can go closer than that. So I will mainly use my weight and the calculation from the Planck constant and so on, boom. So I will not be able to make it that precise because I'm not an engineer in that regard, at least. So you can make it as precise as you want and as precise as you have the tools to. So if you really want to make it more precise, you can buy some more expensive tools. Today, if I should make a kilo today, that means I should have, or not today, but yesterday, what can we call it? Some years ago, that means I should have a copy of the exact kilo in some regards. The closest to that I have is actually the head of my hammer. So that means I should take the head of my hammer, I can calibrate my weight after that, and I should just accept the fact that this hammer is probably exactly 1 kilo. And then I should calibrate my weight after that, and then I can make copies of that and make other things weight 1 kilo, like my sugar weight 1 kilo, a cup of sugar that make 1 kilo. You know what we normally do when we make food. So that's the two way of making a kilo, and you can see a failure of the way we did in the old days was that I'm not sure this is exactly 1 kilo, but I know the Planck constant, with the calculation at least, will be exactly 1 kilo. So that's why we changed it to that and make it fit. And I'm really happy that they actually made it fit so that a liter is still 1 kilo and this hammer is still 1 kilo and so on and so on. But they just made the definition more usable, you could say. So for nearly 220 years, a kilo was defined by some platinum clock. It was actually a cylinder, to be precise. So flat in the top, but not a sphere or anything, but a cylinder placed in Paris in France. And now I have spoiled a little bit in this video about how the kilo was made and what was made before that, because the kilo was made by 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water. But that means that we have invented the centimeter, because else we could not measure 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters at that point in time. And that means, how did we make the centimeter? Well, it means 100th of a meter, so we probably invented the meter before that. And you are right about that, because that was how it was made. And talking about things placed in Paris in France, other things are placed there too. We like placing our measurements there. So Paris in France are basically just a definition of the SI metric system. But more on that in another video, I guess. Because I will probably do a video about the meter too and how that was made. Because that's also an interesting story and can also be a long story when I talk about at least. But I think this concludes the story about the kilo and how it changed. And again, I'm kind of sad that the kilo is no longer defined by the kilo in France anymore, but it's probably for the better because it makes kind of more sense. Or actually, it doesn't really make sense in a metric system way that it is defined by the Planck's constant, because it's so many fucked up numbers. Where to just say 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water is like we like it. We like things in tens in the metric system. That's something you don't know in the imperial system. But if you compare the metric system to the imperial system, you will easily see that we like tens here a lot, because everything has something with tens. There's nothing that is like times 5 or 3 or 3.5 or 0.75 or something strange. Everything is times tens. So it just makes sense that everything are related. Like a liter is 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water. A kilo is 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water. So everything is related. Length, weight, and volume are all related to each other. Both the liquid and hard materials are related and done the same way, weighed in the same way. So it's very strange to define, like we define a centimeter as 100th of a meter. We define a kilometer as 1,000th of a meter. So to define a kilo, to say Planck's constant times whatever, instead of saying a kilo is 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water, that feels strange. So you should probably not do that, also because that doesn't really be important, because that is the exactly precise definition of it. But that's just because we should make something precise, but it's made after the 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water. So it should be just as precise to say that. But the fact is that it's just not precise in the way that we are not really sure that 10 by 10 centimeters of water weighed the same as what it did when we made the new definition of the Planck's constant. So the only problem is you cannot be sure you are saying it precise when you say a kilo is 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water. Where if you say something about Planck's constant, then you can be sure that that is exactly the definition we use now, at least. But maybe we change the definition again at some point. But at least it's the definition we use now. It is the definition we use now, and it's precisely that definition, or precisely that value, or whatever. But again, in everyday language, it's the fucking same shit, because nobody do ever use something that precise that they will not be the same shit. So in everyday talk, we can still say that a kilo is exactly 1 liter of water, and a kilo is exact 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters of water, because it is probably, basically, maybe or maybe not the same. Anyway, if you say it exactly precise in the true scientific way. So why bother with that when it makes the same results? You can just talk about it normally. So the takeaway here is, maybe it's kind of scary thinking about that the kilo is no longer the kilo anymore, but it's something about Planck's constant, something alien we don't really know about as normal humans. But to settle down a little bit, it's just the same fucking shit as always. So it doesn't matter. Say what you want. Just say a kilo. And just measure your waters in liters and kilos as you're used to. It doesn't really make any difference anymore. Anyway, I still have a kilo in my hand, and for me, my hammer head at least weighed exactly 1 kilo. And that's something I really liked about that. So again, before I'm going off topic and talk about long story, I have told you before, then I think I have to say that this is the end of the video. And that be the conclusion of the story of the kilo. And next up, we go to investigate the meter. Of course, that should also be a lot of fun. I cannot think anything else, alright? So I hope you liked this video. And you will find it interesting and maybe you learn something about the kilo. I hope so, or else you know too much already. But then you're just like me. I cannot stop yourself for searching on videos about it. Or else do maybe learn something about how much I appreciate the kilo. Or at least I hope to find some of the parts of the video interesting, or at least got a good laugh of my way of speaking about it. And if you did just some of this, consider subscribing to see more videos of the inside of my head stories, and maybe to see my upcoming video about the meter, or to see what else I'm gonna think about in the future, if you cannot get enough of that. And you can also take a look at my channel and look at my other videos. I have gaming videos, travel vlogs, unboxing, tech reviews, a lot of other stuff too, probably, I don't really know, so take a look, maybe there's something you like. Or if there's not, that's probably also a possibility, but then just don't. However, if you will like this video, then like it. Well, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.